Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Global Taiwan Institute, and welcome to our first public event of 2025. And a happy Lunar New Year to anyone who celebrates it. My name is Russell Shao. I am the executive director here at GTI. GTI is a 501c3 think tank dedicated exclusively to Taiwan policy research and related programs. Our mission is to enhance the relationship between the United States and Taiwan with the world by contributing to a more informed discussion about Taiwan and its people. In pursuit of that mission, we undertake several core programs. They include our Global Taiwan Brief, a biweekly publication, our regular public seminar series, an annual symposium in the fall, 3 podcasts, and scholarship and fellowship opportunities for researchers interested in conducting field research in Taiwan, as well as for Taiwanese researchers interested in performing short-term field research here in the United States. If you're not already subscribed to receive our updates, please do so by visiting our website, www.globaltaiwan.org. I would be remiss if I began today's program without expressing our sincere condolences, of course, to the families affected by the tragic event early this morning that occurred here in Washington, D.C. And also want to thank our board of directors, our advisors, and staff and interns who make all our programs here possible. So let's begin today's program. I'm very pleased to be presenting today's discussion event titled The 4 Pillars of US-Taiwan Policy, Continuity or Change Ahead. Now, with President Donald J. Trump's return to the White House as the 47th President of the United States, there's a question on everybody's mind, at least everyone within our Taiwan policy community, is what is the likely trajectory for US-Taiwan relations over the next 4 years and beyond? It is, of course, the prerogative of any new administration to review policy and past practices. This is a necessary and can be a constructive process to ensure that any policy approaches are continuously updated to reflect current realities and that they are fit for purpose. While some degree of change is a natural feature of democratic transitions, there are important enduring features of the US-Taiwan partnership. The keystone for this relationship, of course, is the Taiwan Relations Act. Enacted over 45 years ago in 1979, it remains the only legal underpinning of US policy toward Taiwan. TRA has provided an enduring framework for US-Taiwan relations and has helped sustain engagements between the two nations across 4 pillars that we will be discussing today, which encompass the defense and security space, the economic dimensions, the international space, as well as people-to-people ties. Certainly, as strategic changes necessitated adjustments in US policy during the Cold War, I think we can agree that ongoing fundamental changes in the geopolitical landscape necessitates, at the very least, a rethink of the US approach to Taiwan policy and cross-strait relations. This process has led to incremental adjustments in the approaches that were taken both under the first Trump administration as well as continued onwards in the previous Biden administration. This is also likely dynamic in the second Trump administration. And even as the US and Taiwan policy of maintaining the status quo has preserved peace in the Taiwan Strait and promoted regional prosperity, it may not be sustainable in the longer term, as the People's Republic of China is unceasingly and aggressively seeking to change it through political warfare, economic coercion, united fronts activities, and gray zone operations, to name just a few. Massive military buildup across the strait by the People's Liberation Army well as the Chinese leadership's continued refusal to renounce the use of force against Taiwan, and the Chinese Communist Party's malign influence are destabilizing the Taiwan Strait and beyond, threatening the peace and security of the Indo-Pacific area. As Beijing doubles down on its effort to undermine the status quo and achieve the political subordination of Taiwan under its One China principle, the Taiwan Relations Act must be the starting point for revisiting the assumptions, longstanding policy, and for ensuring a more robust US-Taiwan partnership. The US-Taiwan relationship is stronger now than it's ever been since 1979. Nevertheless, Taiwan policy approaches should be regularly assessed to ensure that, again, that it is fit for purpose for the next 5, 10, and even 25 years. And there is wide latitude for policymakers within the United States and Taiwan to work within the existing legal and policy framework. However, the foundation should be first based on a thorough understanding of the fundamental features of this strategic partnership, based on the 4 pillars that I have mentioned just earlier. And this should help inform any assessments of the assumptions behind this longstanding approach to ensure its sustainability over time. And so GTI is very pleased to assemble this study group comprised of the panelists that you see here on in front of you to examine the 4 pillars of this strategic partnership. The forthcoming study, which is tentatively titled US-Taiwan Relations, Advancing 4 Pillars of the Strategic Partnership, is currently slated for publication in April. I want to also thank the support of the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office for this project. I want to emphasize that all the opinions expressed in this study are the author's own and do not represent their affiliated organization. And allow me here now to just introduce them briefly in the order in which they will be speaking. To my immediate left, we have Derek Mitchell, who is a non-resident senior advisor to the Office of the President in the Asia Program over at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He most recently served as president of the National Democratic Institute, which is an organization that supports democratic developments worldwide. Ambassador Mitchell was the first U.S. ambassador to Burma, serving in that capacity from 2012 to 2016, and did, I believe, several tours over at the U.S. Department of Defense, handling the Asia policy portfolio, both as PDAF as well as the acting assistant secretary for Asian, then Asian and Pacific Security Affairs. To his left, we have Brent Christensen. He is currently an adjunct professor at Brigham Young University's Political Science Department. He had a distinguished career in the U.S. Foreign Service of over 35 years. His last assignment in the Foreign Service was serving as U.S. representative to the International Civil Aviation Organization, headquartered in Montreal, Canada. And most relevant to our discussion today, he was also previously the director of the American Institute in Taiwan from 2018 to 2021, among many other assignments there at the AIT previously, and handling the Taiwan portfolio at the State Department's Office of Taiwan Coordination, among other roles and responsibilities in the U.S. Foreign Service. Last but not least, we have Adrian Wu, my colleague, who is the program manager here at BTI. She's also the host and producer of Taiwan Salon, our cultural policy and soft power podcast. Adrian specializes in analyzing the intersection of culture and policy, and her research interests include looking at how Taiwan can strengthen its international connections through nation branding, cultural diplomacy, and its civil society. She is a member of the UC Berkeley US-Taiwan Next Generation Working Group, as well as a member of the Foreign Policy for America's Next Gen Initiative. So without further ado, just a reminder to all our in-person audience as well as online viewers that we do want to hear from you. So for those of you joining us online, please send us your questions via contact@globaltaiwan.org. Again, that is contact@globaltaiwan.org. Please include your name as well as your affiliation, and those that do will be prioritized. So we've asked each of our panelists to prepare some opening comments, and then we will turn it over to audience Q&A immediately afterwards so that we can save as much time for, I think, what will be a very interesting and engaging discussion at a very, I think, pivotal time in U.S. policy towards Taiwan. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you, Derek.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Russell. Thank you all for coming. I should say, everybody, for the Year of the Snake.
Yes, sir.
And if you go home, you see my dog playing with a snake. Actually, they're useful for dog toys. I think it started with me. I did the security, so-called security chapter of this. It's a draft chapter. And the notion of Taiwan security, since Taiwan Relations Act, which is a core of this assignment, look at the Taiwan Relations Act, 45, 46, going on half a century old. Where are we? Do we need something? Does it need to be amended? Where are we with the Taiwan Relations Act? You look back to 1979 and now, and obviously a lot has changed. Taiwan has democratized. The definition of security has expanded enormously. In fact, it's all encompassing. For Taiwan, you can say there's never been a more dangerous time for Taiwan than today, maybe since 1950, when there was an imminent moment where China was preparing to jump across the strait in Taiwan. So when we look at this, but most countries look at security as a very essential component of its national policy, but not everyday existential issue. Taiwan isn't now an everyday existential issue, even if you feel it, but really the challenge that is coming from China on a daily basis in a comprehensive sense is as insidious, as comprehensive, as wholesome, as serious as it's been, I would say, certainly about 75 years. So the response has to be according to that, a response according to that, respond accordingly. The Taiwan Relations Act, if you look at it, and in my chapter, I think all of you here, most of us online have read it, you'll see it talks about the United States affirms its interest in a peaceful resolution, providing assistance of a defensive character to enable Taiwan people to have a say in their own future. Even though a lot has changed, some things, as Russell suggested, sustain. That interest sustains. The fundamentals of the Taiwan Relations Act sustains for American interest, that peaceful resolution, security of Asia, the peace and security of Asia, and the American commitment remains to me very fundamental, and I think a consensus in the States, certainly in Washington, of there being a need to affirm that. So the core interest has not changed, even if the atmosphere has. The question, though, becomes how you define these issues, these components, peace and security. Each one of those, what does security mean? How do you define security? Define peace. And the issue of why, and the underlying assumption of all that is that Taiwan matters. That in those days, even though there was normalization with the PRC, Taiwan still mattered to the United States. That was an assumption. That was a consensus. And I think we can never be complacent about that question. It's something I've been writing about for 20 years, because over time, you hear more and more people wondering, well, why should we? I guess the current administration, as you all know, the quotes we've heard, this is a small dot. President Trump's not the only one who makes those points that this is very small. See, China is very big. Why should we care? So those three things need to be continually defined. We take them as assumptions. But I would say that more and more, even as we take care of the defensive issues, the everyday nitty-gritty substance of this bilateral security relationship, we have to look at those definitions and reaffirm some of those fundamental principles. So we're trying to do that in my chapter. I don't have a lot of time to talk through the chapter writ large, and I wouldn't want to here, but I think a lot of it you all will know. I mean, it goes through a little bit of the history at the top, just the background up to 79 of how Taiwan was during the Cold War, and then goes to PRC's military development and the comprehensive way they are looking at making Taiwan less secure in every possible way, using every lever of power that they have, civilian, military, civil military fusion, all of that. PSYOPs, as I think Russell talked about, the psychology of deterrence, the psychology of resilience is absolutely essential. It seems to me that I've been on a bunch of tabletop exercises and planning things, and they're all with a lot of military planners looking at ships and subs and all the rest, and aircraft. I think fundamentally, Chinese strategy is what Chinese strategy has always been, which is to win without fighting. They don't want to have to fight, and they don't want to fight. They know, I think they're not dumb. They know the cost of a conflict. They're looking for every possible avenue, undermine the will to resist, undermine the will to commit from the outside, undermining everything that would make Taiwan be resilient to PRC pressure, and basically make the case that we're inevitable. You can't count on them, only count on us, make your deal now. So I think we have to think about the psychology, the psyops, and deal with that. And I think to a great degree, Taiwan is doing that. Themselves, but probably focused on it just as much. I go through in the chapter how much the US arms sales have been important to this process, its commitment to training, exercises, and arms. I was part of that at the Pentagon. I remember in the old days, I make just a line mention in here, a couple sentences, how 25 years ago, maybe even less, 20 years ago, a lot, or 10, 15 years ago, a lot of this was symbolic, I got the feeling. If you work this account, you had the sense that Taiwan wanted big gleaming stuff, and there were people in the United States that wanted to give it simply as a signal to say we care. That what we offered was a symbol of just how much we loved Taiwan, how much we were committed to Taiwan. But it wasn't necessarily a very serious, systematic examination of what Taiwan really needed, given the cross-strait, the dynamic cross-strait events. Today, stuff is getting real. I think Taiwan knows that, the United States knows that, everyone knows that. So there's much more of this talk, about the porcupine strategy, the asymmetrical strategy, of looking at what are the actual capabilities that are necessary. The time of symbolism, the time of politicization of this issue. Even in the old days, it was frustrating. It was divisive. It was not helpful. But we need to be thinking, both sides, what does Taiwan need? Army-centered, military in Taiwan needs to think about, yes, Army needs to get Army stuff, but is this really an Army-centered contingency? And to make sure there is balance. So we need to be working, and we are, I know, working in Taiwan, but Taiwan needs to be serious about that too, if it's going to get to support the international community to be serious to potentially get himself up to challenge China at a time when most countries who would do so at a cost, even short of conflict, even putting themselves out there to say, this matters to us. Don't do anything, this will cost you China. And it's a critical part of deterrence for PSYOPs back to them. Psychology of deterring them is very important when it comes to all of these issues, what Taiwan does for itself. So security, defining security, it's broad. It gets to what we're going to discuss later. It's about economic. It's about national unity. It's about international dignity. Make sure that people that the society has high morale, has a will, has a sense of that we matter, that we have a place in the world, which Taiwan absolutely deserves. And we should be doing much more with our partners. We talk about that here. I'm sure we'll be talking about it in other sections. But facilitating the ability of Taiwan as already a goods producer to be able to provide those public goods internationally and not be isolated, which is clearly a strategy. The fact that Taiwan is a democracy, strongest in Asia, according to The Economist. We're all works in progress. No democracy is perfect. Taiwan's democracy is not perfect. Polarization is not great. Gridlock is not great. We have to make these things work. But the democratic brand is a associated with Taiwan and offer how you go from military to democracy and thrive. Taiwan civil society, civil resilience, all of that. Taiwan has enormous amount to offer. And then sustainment, security is sustainment, is how, if there is your energy, your health services, your food, your electricity, digital connectivity, are you planning for that? That's civil defense side of things. Not just, I think you all know this, it's being planned, it's being led out of presidential office. All of this is part of the sufficient self-defense capability that 1979, and frankly, I would say in 1999, we were thinking. But stuff is getting where we have to be. So I'm at my 10 minutes. Just finally, I would say again, defining these issues of what is security. Security is, because it's existential for the country, you have to think about it in broad terms. Security runs the gamut. And I think it's why I'm speaking first. And then both be very specific to the traditional use of security and then the non-traditional use of security that will be discussed subsequently. But also two other points. One is I want to get, as we talk about why Taiwan matters, I would like more and more for Washington and others to be talking about Taiwan not simply as a function of China, but as Taiwan. Because Taiwan in and of itself is a success and has something to offer. China wants it to be all about it. It's complete, it's egocentric. It makes Taiwan all about it. It makes whatever the United States does in Asia all about it. The United States, the world, anything is about China. We should not allow it in any way, shape, or form. And we should think about Taiwan as Taiwan, not talk about it simply as a function of China. And finally, the issue of peace. This is where we get to some troublesome things we can discuss in the discussion. Peace is not simply the absence of war. Peace is, you can't have peace without justice. You can't have peace without principle. So simply saying, well, we are going to make peace, we will make sure there is no war across the Taiwan Strait, can lead to winning without fighting for one side. So we have to recognize that this notion of what is peace, what are we looking for? What is Taiwan is embodied in the Taiwan Relations Act? What is being defended there? It's not just a territory, it's not just a geostrategic thing. It's defending the right of the people of Taiwan to have a say in their own future and the right for that system, whatever system, back then it was one party system, but for a system to evolve, become more democratic. That's what the peace needs to be. And we look at the Ukraine model, we look at other models around the world, and when we hear peace, we want to avoid war. We have to recognize, we have to challenge that, because peace at all costs is not necessarily a just peace or a real peace. It's certainly the case when it comes to Taiwan security. So with that, I will stop.
That's fantastic, Eric, and I think you really underscore the fundamental purpose of this study, which is really, threefold, right? Really defining those interests, or redefining them in the, the current strategic context that we are in, and then, really articulating again why the stakes involved and why Taiwan matters, right? And it's so important because part of the PRC's advantages in many regards with its one party system is that it's constantly trying to define the terms, right? And it's utilizing that through various propaganda, United Front means, and it arguably was quite successful for some time in being able to sort of force people to self-censor, institutions to self-censor. It led to the practice of a lot of self-imposed restrictions on the conduct of policy for quite some time, because it was just seen as, sort of a untouchable. And here we are, and I think in this process, at this critical time, is important to really define and articulate what those interests are, because they are embodied in the TRA, but the TRA was drafted with real sort of, I think, a very sort of sustained quality. I mean, it was designed to be sustainable and interpreted and reinterpreted. And this is a time when I think we need to sort of really, we're at an inflection point where we need to clearly define those interests, as you say. Brett, over to you, sir. Okay,
Thank you, Russell, and glad that Eric went off. I think the whole issue of security broadly defined is what the TRA is all about. But I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about the two parts of the report that I'm looking at. One, expanding Taiwan's space, and two, strengthening the US-Taiwan relationship, all in the context of the Taiwan Relations Act. So first on expanding Taiwan's international space. So in addressing this topic, I want to first just highlight how important Taiwan is to the world these days. Even if you didn't know that a few years ago, developments since then have certainly made it patently clear to almost everyone that despite having few official diplomatic relationships, Taiwan is an important player in the world. Perhaps you've heard that Taiwan produces 60% of the world's semiconductors and over 90% of the most sophisticated semiconductors. That's just one really obvious reason why people have become much more appreciative of Taiwan's importance. But there are many more reasons beyond that worth mentioning. One of Taiwan's challenges playing a bigger role in the international community is its inability to participate in the UN system. We can talk later about why that is the case, but it is still, Taiwan is largely excluded from meetings and activities at the UN's organizations, and Taiwan citizens often cannot even gain access to UN venues using Taiwan identity documents. So despite Taiwan's difficulties with the UN, the United States strongly supports Taiwan's participation in international organizations, including the UN. Indeed, the TRA includes language to that effect. And following the 1994 Taiwan policy review, the United States articulated an even more clear policy of support. That is, the United States supports Taiwan's full membership in organizations where statehood is not a requirement, and meaningful participation in those that do, including UN organizations. This policy of support was repeated in 2021. The Secretary of State Tony Blinken called for UN member states to join the United States in supporting Taiwan's robust, meaningful participation throughout the UN system and in the international community. But Taiwan's exclusion from UN organizations like WHO, ICAO, and Interpol has serious consequences. I'm sure you're aware that it was Taiwan in December of 2019 that first detected a possible public health threat in Wuhan. The Taiwan health authorities reported their concerns to the WHO at the end of December, but received no response. Taiwan didn't wait for a response from the WHO to take action. As soon as the Taiwan health officials assessed at the end of December 2019 that there was a possible health concern headed their way, they immediately began to implement strict border controls and health measures. Remember, they learned some hard lessons from the SARS epidemic of 2002. Because of Taiwan's swift response, Taiwan is able to put into place measures that prevented any domestic transmissions of COVID in Taiwan for over a year. I was very pleased to be in Taiwan as the AIT director during that time. Imagine what could have been possible. Taiwan, as a regular participant in WHO, had been able to get WHO to take earlier action to stem the spread of the virus. Another unfortunate example is Taiwan's exclusion from the International Civil Aviation Organization, ICAO, where I recently served as the US representative. Taiwan manages one of the busiest flight information regions in the world, but does not have a direct connection to ICAO, the body that sets international standards and policies for the world's aviation industry. Taiwan's exclusion from ICAO means that there's a very significant hole in ICAO's so-called seamless sky over the East Asian region. Likewise, Taiwan's exclusion from Interpol means that Taiwan does not get the updates and alerts that would help protect Taiwan and the region from international criminal activity. But Taiwan does play an important role in other organizations. The Asian Development Bank, APEC, World Trade Organization, and a number of technical organizations where its contributions are highly valued. Nevertheless, the PRC continues to relentlessly pressure international organizations to exclude Taiwan, minimize its participation, even in small, relatively less important organizations. If you've ever heard of the albatross and petrol constellation organization. Big fire with that. Despite Taiwan's having few diplomatic allies and difficulty in participating in many international organizations, Taiwan's importance to the world community has grown enormously in recent years. For one thing, it has become an impressively successful democracy, ranked number 8 in the latest World Democracy Index and number 1 in Asia. It actually ranks higher than the United States. In recognition of this, in 2019, the United States and Taiwan established the US-Taiwan Consultations on Democratic Governance in the Indo-Pacific, which allows Taiwan to engage with regional counterparts on issues such as disinformation, election transparency, and democratic resilience. The United States has also included Taiwan in the annual summits for democracy. Taiwan has also developed into an impressive high-tech economy. Among the top 20 economies of the world, Taiwan has specialized in producing high-tech products like semiconductors to make it indispensable to the world economy. I happen to mention that Taiwan makes 60% of the world's semiconductors and 80% of the world's high-end semiconductors. I think that really focused the world's attention. But to showcase Taiwan's skills and expertise, the United States and Taiwan established the Global Cooperation Training Framework, or GCTF platform, in 2015. That has thus far put on over 70 international workshops. Since its founding, 3 other partners have joined the GCTF: Japan, Australia, and Canada. And other countries have also joined for specific workshops, including the UK, Israel, Sweden, Netherlands, and Slovakia. Taiwan is also a very generous donor to international humanitarian assistance and disaster relief operations. Time and again, Taiwan has provided significant amounts of aid to countries hit by natural disasters, including the United States. Most recently, Taiwan offered over $500,000 to Los Angeles following the devastating wildfires there. Plus, more assistance is coming in from the Tzu Foundation and other Taiwan NGOs. I would also add that during the pandemic, Taiwan provided the international community with a lot of much needed medical equipment and PPE, including donations of tens of millions of face masks to over 80 countries. The United States alone received 10 million. In fact, if one looks closely at pictures of White House staffers during the pandemic, you'll see that they are wearing face masks made in Taiwan. There's more to be said, but the United States regards maintaining and expanding Taiwan's international space as a major priority. And to that end, I offer a few recommendations. 1, work with like-minded countries to identify opportunities and venues to highlight Taiwan's indispensable value to the world economy as a provider of high-tech products and expertise. 2, advise the State Department to coordinate closely with Congress on legislative initiatives calling for Taiwan's greater involvement in international organizations to complement and support U.S. policy towards Taiwan. 3, identify ways to assist Taiwan's diplomatic allies in resisting PRC pressure to switch recognition and urge Congress to pass the Taiwan Allies Fund Act to provide financial support for these efforts. 4, encourage other countries to join the United States, Taiwan, Japan, Australia, and Canada as official sponsors of the Global Cooperation and Training Framework, the GCTF. 5, examine possible ways in which Taiwan technical experts could participate in activities of UN technical agencies, such as members of NGOs or GONGOs. 6, urge other key economic partners of Taiwan to formalize their trade and investment ties with Taiwan through bilateral agreements. Okay, so that's international space. I'm going to talk a little bit about US-Taiwan, or strengthening the US-Taiwan relationship. This has long been a priority for the United States because Taiwan is one of our most important economic partners. Taiwan is our 8th largest merchandise export market, 6th largest market for U.S. agricultural goods. And I'm told that on a per capita basis, Taiwan consumes more U.S. agricultural or food products than any other country or any other economy in the world. Taiwan, as one of the most important producers of high-tech goods such as ICT equipment and, as noted earlier, semiconductors, is critical to global high-tech supply chains. Because of the importance of Taiwan's semiconductors to the U.S. economy, The United States enthusiastically welcomed the decision by Taiwan's largest semiconductor producer, TSMC, to build semiconductor production facilities, also known as fabs, in the United States. Supported with funding from the CHIPS and Science Act, TSMC is planning to invest a projected $65 billion in constructing cutting-edge semiconductor fabs in Arizona. I'm sure you can all appreciate how important this project is. This project and other such Taiwan high-tech investments in the United States are for U.S. economic and strategic interests. Although Taiwan has dominated the world's semiconductor industry for some time, Taiwan's indispensability to the world economy only came into sharper focus with the severe computer chip shortage that hit during the COVID pandemic. I remember being on the phone with CEOs of U.S. auto companies in late 2020 and early 2021. Computer chip shortages were hindering their ability to keep auto assembly lines in operation, and they were looking for Taiwan to fill the gap. And Taiwan did make a valiant effort to meet this demand by calling on all Taiwan semiconductor companies to boost production, which they did, beyond capacity. From that moment, everyone suddenly came to a new understanding of how important Taiwan is for the economy. According to a 2023 study by Project 2049 and the US-Taiwan Business Council, the loss of access to Taiwan's semiconductor industry could have a negative impact on the US economy greater than either the global financial crisis of 2008 or the COVID lockdown of 2020, perhaps as much as $1.6 trillion or 8% of US GDP. The TRA indicates that it is the policy of the United States to promote closer commercial relations with Taiwan, and also provides for the United States to have the same kind of agreements or other arrangements with Taiwan that it has with other economic partners. However, despite the closeness of the economic relationship, the United States has been slow to sign economic agreements with Taiwan. The Trade and Investment Framework Agreement, TIFA, was signed in 1994. The TIFA talks have only been held sporadically since then, often because of disputes over beef and pork market access. For many years, Taiwan has sought a free trade agreement with the United States. But these appeals fell on deaf ears because of Taiwan's bans on U.S. beef and pork, which created strains in the entire U.S. trade relationship, US-Taiwan trade relationship. President Tsai finally lifted the ban on pork imports, as well as on remaining beef products in 2020. While this didn't lead to an FTA, in 2022, the United States and Taiwan did launch the US-Taiwan 21st Century Trade Initiative, which has certain elements of an FTA. Separately, in 2020, the United States and Taiwan established a process called the US-Taiwan Economic Prosperity Partnership Dialogue, or EPP, to deal with non-trade issues such as investment and supply chains. And just last October, the U.S. Treasury announced that it will at long last be negotiating a bilateral double taxation agreement with Taiwan. Taiwan has not only become expert in making semiconductors, but also in a lot of other leading-edge products. Among these are telecommunication and computer equipment, displays, electric vehicles and batteries, robotics and automation, biotech and pharmaceuticals, advanced materials, Internet of Things, aerospace, and artificial intelligence. Not only does TSMC make all of the chips for the top AI chip company, NVIDIA, nearly all of the major U.S. high-tech firms have established AI research centers in Taiwan. I should mention that NVIDIA co-founder, president, and CEO Jensen Huang is from Taiwan. Okay, so to further strengthen U.S.-Taiwan economic relations, I'd like to offer just a few recommendations. One, work with USTR to further develop the U.S.-Taiwan 21st Century Trade Initiative to reach near FTA levels of economic cooperation. Two, urge the U.S. and its Taiwan counterparts to complete the negotiations for a bilateral double taxation agreement as soon as possible. Three, convene more regular trade and investment framework agreement, or TIFA, meetings. The last one was in 2021. Four, send more senior level U.S. economic officials to Taiwan in support of specific measures to strengthen the bilateral economic relationship. Five, encourage more Taiwan semiconductor and other high-tech firms to invest in the United States and also find opportunities to publicly recognize those high-tech Taiwan firms that are already investing in the United States. So that's enough for me, more than enough, I'm sure.
Thank you so much, Brent. Really excellent interview there, and thank you also for taking on the heavier lift amongst all of us by taking on two sections of the study. I think you did a wonderful job in really underscoring the point led off by Derek here in terms of the need to define these interests more broadly now in the strategic context that we're in, and I think you articulated in very in excellent ways really the security implications of both the international space dimension and as well the economic dimensions of the relationship that sometimes in the policy debates here in Washington are so narrowly focused on just that defense element of it, and then international space economic issues just become sort of put on the sort of on the back burner. But I think what you hope to underscore here is that there are security implications there in the international space side as well as the economic side, not just for Taiwan, but also for the United States and the world. And I think there's no clearer example of this, of course, than what happened with the COVID-19 pandemic as well. And so that's matter that's not only for Taiwan, but world health, security issues too. So I think we need to, really, articulate these issues in a more a clearer manner that I think we all here understand, but perhaps it gets lost in the debates about the imminency or the urgency of the defense equation in this town. Okay, well, let me turn it over to to the co-author of the section that we're working on the last, but not the least important part of it, the people-to-people ties. And so, Adrian, I'm going to turn it over to you, please.
Yeah, thank you so much, Russell. And thank you to Derek and Brent for laying such a good foundation for what I'm also going to be discussing. I think just like Brent and Derek, we have a lot of trouble trying to figure out what exactly we want to talk about for the panel, because there's just so many different things that we can talk about in terms of people-to-people ties. But I think we looked at three different examples. So I'm going to be focusing on the US-Taiwan Education Initiative, subnational diplomacy, and people-to-people ties, and tech diplomacy and health diplomacy. And I think that this really builds upon what Brent was saying as well, in that there have been a lot of opportunities for Taiwan, maybe because of worsening relations between the US and China, but at the same time, these relations are strengthened through Taiwan being recognized for its strengths in semiconductor industry, and also its strengths in terms of how it handled COVID. So while there might be some opportunities due to US-China relations, at the same time, it also comes down to mutual investment and mutual benefits from both the US and Taiwan governments, as well as for the US and Taiwan communities. So starting off with the US-Taiwan Education Initiative. So it was launched in 2020, and the initiative focused on expanding access to Chinese and English language instruction while safeguarding academic freedom. And this was driven by two trends. So first, the closing of Confucius Institutes in the United States, and Taiwan's growing investment in English instruction, as also seen in Taiwan's bilingual 2030 policy. As part of this initiative, funding for Fulbright has increased yearly since 2020, totaling $1 million in 2023, 2024. And also the Taiwanese government has contributed $1 million in 2023 and $1.6 million in 2024 to US State Department language programs and scholarships. So once again, you see this mutual investment from both the United States and Taiwan. So since 2020, at least 111 Confucius Institutes have closed in the United States. And at the same time, Taiwan has signed 26 education MOUs with 24 US states, and they've also established 66 Taiwan centers for Mandarin learning. Also, there's been an increase in US students studying in Taiwan, as well as Taiwanese students studying in the US. So in the academic year of 2023 to 2024, there was a 6% yearly increase from the previous year. So that came to 23,187 Taiwan students in the United States. And in terms of US students in Taiwan, for the same year, 2023 to 2024, there were 5,082 US students in Taiwan. And this, I think it's also important to note that this is higher than pre-pandemic numbers as well. So pre-pandemic, 1,270 US students were studying in Taiwan, so during 2018 to 2019. And this has also been accompanied with a huge decrease in US students studying in China. So if we compare post-pandemic and pre-pandemic numbers, so the same number pre-pandemic 2018 to 2019, there were 11,639 US students in China. And for 2022 to 2023, there were only 469 US students in China. So this is a really huge decrease. And of course, there are a lot of different factors that contribute to this, but I think that the US-Taiwan Education Initiative and this increased funding also support these trends that were already occurring in US and Taiwan. So now turning on to subnational diplomacy. So there are currently 99 sister city partnerships between Taiwan and the United States, and these cover a wide scope of different areas. So sports, education, city development, cultural events, exchanges, economic ties, so a huge range of topics. But there also are some challenges that these sister city partnerships face. So they often struggle with a lack of resources, and they are also usually driven by the work of passionate individuals and sometimes also Taiwanese American communities. So because of this, the relationship is usually very closely related to the person that's driving the relationship. So for example, if a mayor is interested in strengthening economic ties with Taiwan, that would be the main focus of the relationship. But then as well, if that person stops becoming interested in pushing forward this initiative, then the ties then become stagnant. Additionally, sometimes local government officials end up becoming bullied by PRC actors because they are unfamiliar with US One China policy, and they end up conflating it with Beijing's One China principle. So it's also very important for these local government officials to be aware of what the US foreign policy is. So of course, training these local government officials is also very important. And I believe this is something that the Taiwan Coordination Office is already working on. And then in terms of state offices, so as of October 2024, 23 US states and Guam have opened offices in Taiwan. And this is a massive increase from 6 in 2020. So why has there been this increase? So there's an increased interest in investing in Taiwan, partially due to worsening US-China relations again, but also because of Taiwan's high-tech industries and of course the US-Taiwan initiative on 21st century trade. And they also face similar issues as sister city partnerships, so limited resources, but Taiwan's MOFA also provides subsidies for office rental spaces in Taiwan. So also again, there's Taiwanese investment coming in to try to support some of these efforts. And lastly, moving on to people-to-people ties in tech diplomacy and health diplomacy. I think Brent already did a great job of laying out and talking about Taiwan's handling of the COVID-19 pandemic and how this has really shown how Taiwan can help. As a result, AIT and TechRose signed an MOU on health cooperation in 2020. And this actually happened when Brent was the AIT director. So maybe if you have some questions about this, you can also direct them to him during the Q&A portion. So this MOU was on health cooperation to cooperate on fighting COVID-19 and also on knowledge sharing. But this MOU will expire this year, August 2025. And it can be extended for an additional 5-year period. So I think as this expiration date is coming up, I think it'll be really important for the US and Taiwan to think about how we might want to expand this agreement or maybe revise it. And in terms of the scientific and tech agreement, it was to cooperate on coordinated programs, joint research, workshops, etc. And this particular agreement will be active for 10 years, so it will expire in 2030. And it will automatically extend for 10-year periods unless it's terminated. And of course, this interest in tech and health has also played out in university ties. So just to mention a few examples, We have Arizona State University's Taiwan Going Global Initiative, University of Texas Systems MOU with the University of Academic Alliance in Taiwan, as well as the University of Washington's partnership with the National Taiwan University on a semiconductor-focused study abroad program to gain insights into Taiwan's semiconductor industry. And these three programs were all from 2023 to 2024, so they're all quite recent programs. And there's also the UC Berkeley's Taiwan Health Innovator Accelerator Program, which started in 2021. And this was born out of a partnership from UC Berkeley and the Ministry of Science and Technology and Taiwan's National Development Council. So as you can see, there is definitely an interest, not only through partnerships through AIT and TechRow, but also through university communities as well. So I'm going to hand it over to Russell to give his recommendations, but I think what I really want to underscore during my portion is that all of these things show that there is mutual investment from US and Taiwan, as well as mutual benefits. So I think that's really important that it goes to Taiwan's strengths, as well as looks at shared challenges between Taiwan and the US. And while engagement may have increased partially because of US-China tensions, it was also strengthened and is enduring because of Taiwan's strengths. And there's still room to grow and even build upon these cooperation agreements even more.
Brilliant, Adrian. And I think I would add that amongst the four pillars that we addressed in this study, the defense and security to the international space, economics, and the people-to-people ties, our section was perhaps, and I may be a little biased, but probably required the most amount of work, because we found that there was actually no shortage of things that the two sides are doing and could be doing more of to really bolster the U.S. Partnership. And it really is, the people-to-people tie really is the bedrock, of the U.S.-Taiwan relationship. And it's such a key enabler of all these other areas that we're talking about on the security side, on the economic side, on the international space side. And this is an area, of course, that the TRA explicitly makes absolutely clear that it is the policy of the United States to preserve and promote extensive, close and friendly commercial, cultural, and other relations between the people of the United States and the people on Taiwan. And since, Adrian already provided, really the meat and all the details, I think, it's good to help emphasize perhaps just some of the top level priorities that we discovered in examining this section on the current state of US-Taiwan people-to-people ties that are ripe for, further growth. And I think generally speaking, there are, five areas, and I'll conclude with just a few recommendations so that we can get into the discussion portion of today's event. But those five sections are: one, deepening and broadening educational initiatives. And I think, again, Adrian already mentioned the extensive amount of sort of work that's already started, but really, I think this is such a key, crucial area where there is just, and it also emphasizes really the strategic nature of people-to-people ties that oftentimes gets relegated to kind of just softer issues, if you will. And really, there is a strategic component to it because, again, this is that the people are really the bedrock of this partnership. While, sort of oftentimes highlighted for their sort of high-profile nature, but there is substance in the importance of the legislative exchanges that are happening. And I think perhaps no other area is more representative of the, sort of the people-to-people ties when you have duly elected representatives of the people engaging one another. And I think this is particularly important in the context of the US-Taiwan relationship, given the unique nature of the bilateral relationship and the absence of diplomatic ties. The subnational component part of it that that Adrian already highlighted really could be doing a lot more. We, as much as we are seeing opportunities, as are obviously challenges to that also as well. And that's one area that we do want to focus on a bit in terms of our recommendations. Efforts to sort of multilateralize people-to-people ties. I think this is a creative avenue that we can sort of examine a bit more of. I think this bridges in the areas of international space and economics as well. But it's part of the challenge for Taiwan has always been sort of the multilateral settings because it's not just a matter of what the United States does, but it also involves other actors and players that are oftentimes, as mentioned earlier, bullied by the PRC from engaging with Taiwan. I think there's and I think emphasizing the importance of the people ties, which should not be sensitive in any regard, is an area that I think just makes it's just common sense. And certainly in enhancing the people contacts with specialists, both in the public health and technology sector, this is just a clear convergence of both the strategic interest and the policy imperative of the people relationship that is part and parcel of the importance of this strategic partnership. And so I will conclude just with a few highlights of some recommendations that, as we were drafting this report, we ran into the problem of having too many recommendations. And so we needed to sort of prioritize because, again, this is an area that's so ripe for further development, but because our attention is so often so narrowly focused in certain, obviously, key critical areas, that the air gets sucked out of the room when we talk about people-to-people ties. We're so consumed about that discussion about the invasion scenario or other various contingencies, and here I think where there's just a lot of room for intellectual input and creativity to really help bolster the partnership, because again, like I said, we found that this really is a key enabler for growth of the US-Taiwan partnership. And the first of which, amongst the recommendations that we have, is that, as Adrian underscored, there have been certainly notable increases in US state level interactions with Taiwan in recent years. But the fact of the matter is there's still currently a lack of capacity, both at the state level for deepening engagement with Taiwan and also within Taiwan government as well, and businesses to really access that knowledge and utilize those connections and ties that are building to really help, to help, expand market opportunities, but also to build not only the commercial ties, but the people ties. And so there has to be, more resources, that can be, invested in that component of the relationship. I think it's useful to also underscore the stark contrast in which the United States has approached the subnational engagement with Taiwan, where this is just really a willing Taiwan. The United States is a willing partner in this regard, and the extent to which the various states have taken the initiative and gone and established their offices, of course, with some help and facilitation from the U.S. government, central government. That they're a willing partner, they're willing to engage, and on the other hand, of course, looking at the concerns and the risks associated with PRC subnational diplomacy, and that's I think this is just a clear contrast of differences and why the United States values this relationship with Taiwan in so many ways, and we need to explore these various avenues to expand that. So. Second of which is that, while this is not a substitute for cabinet level interactions between the executive branches of the two governments, congressional delegations, as I mentioned, are important demonstrations of U.S. public support for Taiwan. The legislative branch is a part of the U.S. government and serves as an important communications channel between the two governments and help build trust between the two nations through these exchanges. And, these need to be regularized and not politicized every single time that something like this happens. And relatedly, I think Brent had mentioned this with regards to other areas of other portfolios related to international space and economics, but visits by senior officials with the appropriate portfolio or enhancing people-to-people ties, needs to also be regularized. The last visit by the Assistant Secretary of State for Educational and Cultural Affairs, in charge of people-to-people diplomacy, that was back in 2018, if I'm not mistaken. I have to double check that, but that is it's just a wide gap right now in terms of that type of, and there should be these regular channels for this, given the mechanisms that are now in place, like the educational initiative, like the science and technology initiatives, like the other host of even the Taiwan Fellowship, programs that have been assigned, and it should be faithfully implemented. That there are a lot of areas where, with officials at the appropriate levels that can really lead and take initiative on these issues to discuss with counterparts in Taiwan. So as I mentioned, just because I mentioned it just now, effectiveness of people-to-people ties does not necessarily require new authorities or new laws per se. The reported delays in the implementation of the Taiwan Fellowship Act, as well as the United States Taiwan Public Health Protection Act, should be implemented in full. And these were part of the NDAA authorizations, from fiscal year 2023. These laws express the will of the people, and these are legislations that are already on the books and have been signed into law. And so, it's only effective with implementation. And I think there's, again, opportunity now to pick up that ball and run with it, given, renewed interest in these areas. And finally, I think one final recommendation before I turn it over to our audience, as well as, our other co-panelists to address. But, the US-Taiwan partnership, oftentimes we could talk of it as a sort of a unique structure and unique status. And indeed, in some ways, it's spoken of as a sort of it's a negative. But otherwise, it'll be interesting to look at it as potentially these unique institutions in ways that can be better and more effectively utilized to help further the US-Taiwan partnership. So, so for instance, in the US-Taiwan partnership, there's a unique institution in AIT Washington, and this could be an institution that could be better utilized to deepen American understanding of Taiwan. I think there's been recent efforts made by AIT Washington, and how the chairperson had become increasingly more public engaged with the American public as well as the businesses to understand the economic relationship. And perhaps this is a good start for further engagements to help Americans better understand the importance of the partnership, to have it come from someone in such a position. And so, those are just, again, some preliminary findings and recommendations that we have made so far. And as I mentioned earlier, this full report, we're still going to be working on it in the months to come, with the expected release in April, which will also coincide with the 46th anniversary of the Taiwan Relations Act, to have a fully more polished and also comprehensive set of findings and recommendations going forward. And so with that, let me just remind our online audience members. I see that there's some few questions coming in already that, if you want to, we want you to engage in this conversation as well. So please send your questions to contact@globaltaiwan.org. Again, that is contact@globaltaiwan.org. So with that, then, let me open it up to our audience members, and raise your hands. We don't have a mic. We have microphones that are attached to our ceilings that can pick up the audio, so no worries about that. And then please state your name as well as your affiliation, and then if you have a directed question to one of the panelists, please direct them so that we know who should respond. Okay.
Yeah, I'm Tina Chong with Voice of America's China Division. I have a question because, this, as Russell said, this study is going to be published in April. And you talked about, I think, more on the continuity part. But what about the change? Because we're right now entering into a new administration. Are you expecting anything to change? Are you going to revise what you just said? And also, my second question is more on the current issue related to US and Taiwan, the strategic, the trilateral situation. Because last week, we all know that Secretary Rubio talked over the phone with Wang Yi. And I'd like to know, especially, you two both have been working in the government. What's your observation about that interaction? Thank you.
The two questions, and I think they're directed to Derek and Brent. So, like to take the question about changes and what.
I'll just make a couple of preliminary comments. I think US policy almost always follows US interests. And our interests have not changed. So by and large, I don't think our policy will change. I think we've already seen a good deal of continuity from first Trump administration into the Biden administration. I think we will see some continuation of that as well. I think it is also true, however, that there could be a few changes. I'm sure our ability to persuade WHO to let Taiwan be an observer in the WHO or World Health Assembly is going to be enhanced by our withdrawing from that institution. Anyway, Derek?
Well, I affirm, I mean, this report is about how we observe changes since 1979 and continuities in our recommendations going forward. And I don't know that anything that would happen between now and then will change our perspective on what should happen, where things are and where the opportunities are to broaden this relationship in the sustained interest of the United States based on the principles of the Taiwan Relations Act and otherwise. So I don't know that we would adjust. It may be that as we roll out the report, we may talk to that issue as we get questions about it, because that's what everyone's going to be thinking about. We don't know what will happen even in the next week, because every week seems to be a year. So we're talking, what, 8 weeks, 12 weeks? It could be a whole nother universe with more conversations and meetings and such, that we would then take what we said and then accommodate what the realities are from what we hear from the White House. There's a wild card there. We just don't know. I think there's a great deal of reason for concern about not where the people around the president are, but where the president himself is. I think there's a lot of reassurance from people that are close around him for what they have said. But I think more than most administrations, you're talking about a singular figure who will have his own mind and drive his own policy. He will get, I'm sure, advice, right, I think, type of advice from people around him, but we just don't know ultimately when he gets in that room and also what he will do and what is in his head. And there's, again, I think a great deal of reason to worry, be concerned about it. But we just don't know yet, so it's too soon to want to have conjecture. We can all and connect dots and be concerned, but for now, let's just see how it goes. The Wang Yi Rubio call, it was, there are readouts by both sides. You don't know what the nuances of it was. The readout from the PRC side was somewhat, concerning, but it showed a hard line from Wang Yi, dictating, lecturing, pushing new Secretary of State to hopefully do the right thing. Again, that relationship will be critical, but the president, as it were, seat relationships can be the most important. We simply don't know where that's headed. There's a reason to concern, though, just the freezing of grants and loans, talk of tariffs, semiconductors, this sense of America's first, just America first, America's first, our hemisphere, and being really the priority, and what's out there is far away. We don't know how far that goes, but as I said, there's a reason for the questions. What will happen by April and beyond?
I'm going to take a question from our online audience, and then I'll return back to the in-person audience again. So this question comes from Jeffrey Guo of the George Washington University lecturer there. This question is addressed to Derek and Brent. The question here is, the new Secretary of Commerce, Howard Ludwig, mentioned Taiwan and the views on building the chip in his opening in the confirmation that he would like to revitalize the U.S. ability to rebuild the semiconductor industry. The CHIPS Act, an excellent down payment to Taiwan. President Trump also mentioned in a couple of press opportunities Question is, do you think the strategy to bring back the chip industry to America would potentially jeopardize the US-Taiwan relationship in the future? Brent, start with your concept.
I would say actually it does quite the opposite. It strengthens our relationship. This is I think it is very clear that Morris John, American citizen still in rights, went to Taiwan and established this amazing company. But there are all of these new, long-standing connections between the United States and Taiwan, particularly at the tech level. My former neighbor, Steve Chen, founders of YouTube, who's living in Taiwan right now, just established this new kind of software hub, Silicon Valley initiative, that shows that there is, this kind of cross-fertilization continues to go on. I think it's also worth noting that CA is going to be working with Intel to produce chips, TSMC, wafers. I mean, there's just a lot of activity back and forth, and I think that those connections will only make the relationship stronger. That's not good.
I mean, it should be an issue in the relationship. I agree. It should be making our relationship stronger. But this gets to my point about the comprehensive view of security by this administration. You have to know who your friends are. You have to know that security of Taiwan, economic security of Taiwan, is not necessarily at our own expense. That we certainly have to be concerned, and other than people concerned, about the vulnerability we have with a single point of failure. 90%, you mentioned several times, 90% of the high-end chips are Taiwan, 60% chips generally. And that's why we have CHIPS Act, and that's why we want to bring things to other places in case there is a catastrophe. But it shouldn't come, and I know there's that Morris John and other concern about, is this then we give up our chips? Does that make us less valuable to the United States? It should not. But if a mindset is all about trade balances, and about money and about economics, and about the broad security, strategic factors of Asia and the globe, then you're going to have very narrow-minded views on these things. We talked, the Biden administration talked about friendshoring. Their idea was, let's make sure that where they are, yes, we have to have access in the United States, we should bring things to the United States, but it's also about sharing among our friends. And so we have predictable access to, so we're not destroying the trade relationships, or at least securing them so they're not in places they'd be vulnerable to coercion, a shut-off like in China. But the signals are, if you have no friends, there's no friend sharing. There are no allies. If allies friends don't matter. It's really just about us. That's a very narrow view of security, very narrow. That comes at a cost. And I worry that's the mindset. So while it shouldn't be effective in the US-Taiwan relationship, it seems to be infecting the mindset of the president, and therefore being sent out to his administration that will simply do what he wants, or will follow through on his instinct. And that can come at the expense of Taiwan's sense of security, as could view semiconductors as something they need, so that they're not vulnerable to Taiwan, and therefore makes Taiwan maybe in their mind expendable. That's their worry.
Yeah, excellent points, Brian. And Derek, I think the only point that I would add additionally to that, if the goal is to increase investments into the United States from Taiwan in these different sectors, then I think the administration needs to move expeditiously on the avoidance of double taxation agreement with Taiwan, which really hurts that goal actually if you're forcing Taiwanese businesses to compete at a different playing on an uneven, level playing field while you're trying to encourage those types of investments that I agree generally will help strengthen the sinews of the U.S.-Taiwan partnership by raising the stakes for both sides of a more strengthened economic relationship that's not just one-sided. So, okay, let's jump in here.
Hi, I'm Colin Nguyen, and I'm an undergraduate at GW. And my question is more directed to Derek, Adrian, and Russell. So their current reports kind of the partisan divide between the KMT and the TPP in terms of kind of defense budget. And I think there was a report the other day that talked about how the KMT dominated legislative branch passed a kind of a defense cut budget, I guess. And I was wondering maybe what is the future, DPP, the executive party right now, what is the future for them to kind of reach a middle when it comes to defense? And what's the role of kind of the voters in regards to, like, do they prioritize defense in the future, or what is, like, maybe industry and economics? Thank you.
Um, I guess I can start, look, I think the nuances of the politics of appropriation and defense spending in Taiwan is a very complex and complicated topic. This is actually not the first time something like this has happened, unfortunately, in Taiwan's, defense debates. I think people may recall in the early 2000s, there was a similar issue with hold up in the legislative yuan of appropriations for defense articles at that time. And, I would just say that, it sends entirely the wrong signal at a time when, the urgency of Taiwan's defense is taken as seriously as it is internationally to have this matter be, on international display that Taiwan is, unable to come to a clear consensus on its, defense needs. But again, the politics of this is certainly more complicated, than I think the sort of public understanding of these issues are at this point. But I do get the sense that that both all the major political parties take Taiwan's national defense seriously, and hopefully that they will come to a consensus and a agreement on a appropriate defense budget that reflects the urgency of the issue at hand, and that such matters would not be politicized as they are, but that is an unfortunate feature of not only Taiwan's democracy, of course, but of many democracies worldwide. So.
I don't know. I think Russell said everything really well, so I don't know if I really have much to add to that. I do think it is very complicated, and we are seeing issues, within democracies around the world where, we're having polarization and problems pushing forward certain policies. And this is definitely not something that's unique to Taiwan, but it is a problem within Taiwan.
Yeah, a final data point that I would add, and it's a useful data point to the second part of your question about public opinion. According to opinion surveys conducted within Taiwan by institutions like the Institute for National Security and Defense Research, does show that there is public support for higher defense spending within Taiwan. And so, when you have such matters that are these issues now playing out in the legislative yuan, where the opposition parties ostensibly for cause of for the purpose of greater legislative oversight, which I think in a democracy and is generally a something that is warranted. But does this actually reflect the will of the people in terms of again greater support for defense spending? And yet this is happening. It does raise the issue of whether or not is this actually in fact doing the work of the people or proper politicking of a very, I think, serious matter of national security.
That quickly stressed. And it's terrible time. It's just absolutely the worst thing that can happen to this thing. I think very politic answers and very appropriate answers. I think GTI is probably in a sensitive place, not wanting to be partisan in respect. I'm not meaning to be partisan or inject America into the very complicated debates that we all have about defense spending and such. But it all, you look at this moment, not only for Taiwan and its own defense, what its needs are, and the signals it needs to send across the strait, but given the nature of the new administration here, what they're looking for from partners and from commitment. So it's just the worst possible timing. Be cutting defense budgets, when we all have been saying, I mean, this isn't a Trump thing, wanting and having Taiwan commit to 3% of its GDP for defense. That's a long-standing thing. I remember having a pretty frank argument when I was the acting assistant secretary in the early Obama administration with an old friend. When he was saying, this was during our Great Recession, we're growing at, this year's just like 4%. And our unemployment rate's now kicked up to something like 3%. And, we can't spend too much on defense. Like, really? That's your line coming to the United States during 2009, 2010, that you can't afford it because your growth rate's only 4%. This is a long-standing issue for all of us that Taiwan needs to spend for its own defense and be serious and not just look at it as, oh, we're buying your stuff, so we're buying your defense. We're buying your protection. Just like Trump says, we're buying protection money. I hear that from some friends in Taiwan. That's why we spend stuff, just not from officials, from citizens who say, oh, this is just protection money. The US will be there for us. No, you've got to do it for yourself. It's going to take us time if we have to get there to get there. And the signals are right now, given the way this administration is looking around, who's spending, who's showing commitment, there is a legitimate side to that, and there's an illegitimate, extreme side to that. But in either case, either respect, the signal being sent now of cutting the budget and not being able to come to a conclusion, consensus, based on the national consensus that we need to be serious about this, is very unfortunate, to say the least.
I'm gonna take one more question. I'm gonna take a question from the online audience, and then I will come back again to the in-person audience. The second question comes from Sam Yebo from Brazil. Okay. And the question, there's this context to it, but then I'm just gonna get straight to the question. The question for the panel is, how prepared is the United States and Taiwan to work together to spread Taiwan's model democracy to struggling democracies around the world? Will a US-Taiwan partnership, are the two countries working on leveraging joint benefits around the world through cultural diplomacy and other soft power engagement? So I suppose one of the questions can be directed to you, Derek. It didn't address anybody specifically, but and maybe the cultural diplomacy part of it, I'll turn it over to you, Adrian. And then Brent, feel free to engage if you're so inclined. So, but yes, about democracy, promoting Taiwan's model democracy. And then the second question about cultural diplomacy is on yourself.
Absolutely. And no question, you're asking someone who used to head the National Democratic Institute is interested in this and had thought about this. We established an office in Taipei along with the National Republican Institute several years back because of this idea that Taiwan can be a center for regional conversations about democracy. Again, sharing experiences. It's not that any democracy, even if you're the number one in Asia, doesn't make you a perfect democracy. Share their experiences and their lessons learned with others around the world. I absolutely think the US and Taiwan, under the right circumstances, assuming that the United States is going to be doing this in the years to the future. Big questions about us now. But theoretically, absolutely. And I actually thought, I was working on this, I should say that publicly or not, but the year before Taiwan left, I was talking to some people around her. She's a wonderful symbol for that, to go around, not as a partisan person, but as a woman president of democracy, a leading Asian democracy. She can, in some ways, demonstrate without showing a flag or being political, being politic, but simply representing, as I say, the public goods and experience of Taiwan people, Taiwan society over the last generation or more. Saying, here are the lessons learned, and here are things that maybe we can offer to share with others. So yes, I think there's much more that can be done with that. Civil society, I should also say civil society. We're all dealing with the scourge of countering disinformation and challenging the information integrity that we see. And there's a remarkable remarkable civil defense ecosystem in Taiwan that should be shared innovatively with others.
So in terms of cultural diplomacy and soft power, I think it's interesting because a lot of times we think of soft power purely in that cultural context. But if you look at the definition of soft power, it's also related to foreign policy, political values, et cetera. So when I was starting my podcast, Taiwan Salon, you can listen to it on our website. I asked a lot of the people that I was interviewing, what do you think Taiwan's main soft power resource is? What should we be looking at in terms of soft power? And actually, a lot of people really believe that Taiwan's main soft power resource is their democracy, their commitment to democratic values, as well as their civil society. And so I think that being able to showcase Taiwan's democracy on platforms like Summit for Democracies has been really important, as well as their work with the US and other countries through the Global Cooperation Training Framework to help other countries have also been really important. So I think that actually in terms of soft power, some of these ways of showing Taiwan as a model of democracy and having Taiwan engage in these different platforms to talk about its form of democratic governance have been really important. But in terms of cultural diplomacy specific, there are some programs that the US and Taiwan do work on together in terms of like professional programs, et cetera, exchange programs. So there are some things, but at the same time, there are also, just like you've been saying this entire time, but also areas for improvement and broadening that as well.
I think we have time. No, Brett, please, yes. Yeah.
I think some people in places in Asia suggest that the democracy isn't really quite right for Asia, but Taiwan is a clear counterexample. Shows that it really does work. In fact, it's not only really impressive Asian democracy, but it's a very impressive Chinese-speaking Asian democracy.
I think we have time to take about 2 questions from the in-person audience here. Okay, maybe we just take 3, but then let's make those questions direct and quick. So the 3 of you, this gentleman in the front, please, first. Name,
Fulbright exchange scholar from American University Law School and from China. So I want a very quick question about this. Talking about the professor, talking about getting more involved of Taiwan into the international organizations. And we also talk about the cutting, the Congress is cutting the budget of defense. So if, when it comes to the combination, it shows a little paradox because if the US support, I want to get more involved into the, no matter in one name, into the international organization, that the WHO, it always, from the aspect of history, it always shows the escalation of the Taiwan Strait, which also lead to the, because the US government have the nowadays in the world globally, American government has more concerns about the priority like the Russian-Ukraine war or the Middle East situation. So it's trying to, I'm trying to say, can you see the paradox of these topics for really trying to involve into organization? The world stage level, Taiwan shows Taiwan's sovereignty, but also need to maintain the defense budget at the same time.
So yeah, if I could just kind of rephrase that into a question, which is basically how does the Taiwan's defense budget issue right now affect U.S. willingness to support it internationally? And so it's kind of like similar to the earlier question, but this one seems to address directly to you, Brent. But anyways, let me take the 2 other questions, please. Sir, in the back.
Okay, hi, I'm Wesley, and I learned about this from like one of your students that you guys have. I'm a dual citizen of US and Taiwan, and I'm just curious, like, what are your guys' like personal driving forces for like working on Taiwan's issues?
Lady.
Hi, I'm Eileen, and I'm currently studying in Columbia University in School of International and Public Affairs. And I have a background of international law, previously studied in National Taiwan University. So I'm born and raised in Taiwan, and so I'm very grateful for this occasion and your contribution for Taiwan-American relations. My question is, I strongly agree with semiconductors have certainly elevated Taiwan's international standing. But just a few days ago, President Trump threatened to impose tariffs on Taiwan semiconductors, as he previously accused Taiwan of stealing nearly 100% of America's semiconductor industry, and suggested that Taiwan could pay more for US protection. Given the situation, it seems for me that semiconductors have become a double-edged sword for Taiwan, and the increasing emphasis on hard power and foreign policy may make Taiwan's position more precarious in terms of both security and economics. My question is, how should Taiwan navigate these challenges, especially with Trump's payout approach and his unpredictable actions?
All right, good questions. One of the defense budget, Taiwan's defense budget affecting US willingness to support it, to your, how do you get involved in Taiwan policy issues, and then finally the sort of the emphasis on hard power, its impact on, so. Anyone just take any questions that you like, maybe. Brad,
I'll comment on the first question.
Okay, sure.
Taiwan's defense spending or budget. The willingness to participation in international order meetings. I actually think they're kind of similar. I don't really think that this is going to be less willing to support Taiwan in international organizations. And for our own interests, it's important that we do that. It is unfortunate that Taiwan, the LY has cut the budget, but I think that's more direct to our security relationship rather than what we're doing in national organizations.
Derek, did you have a comment on any of the questions?
Yeah, minus 2 minutes.
Yes, yes, that's right. Yeah, we are over time.
Or maybe take the last two. Maybe in inverse order. I'll start last as the personal. Your comment about Trump, what's the strategy dealing with Trump, given the unpredictability? Such as that's basically the bottom line question. I mean, I think that's going to be partly the challenge of people around him. There are people that get this, of why Taiwan matters. I think Congress, mobilizing Congress, PRA is a congressional, maybe the most, we've always said this, maybe the most impactful, successful piece of congressional legislation, security legislation by history. I mean, it's remarkable how it's played the role it has and sustains this. I can't think of any other piece of legislation that's been successful. So Congress may feel pretty strongly about the issues and ensure that, try to get Trump to a different place. Otherwise, I'm sure the Taiwan government is struggling to think about how do you demonstrate that you're giving on the semiconductor issue in some fashion that will make him feel like he owns something. He has to feel like he's successful, like he got something. We don't know with the second term whether just a fig leaf is enough. In the past, the first administration, he made very bad deals. And he said they were great deals. And that was fine, maybe. This time, we don't know what he really wants. We don't know what his intentions are towards Taiwan. How far it goes with the economics over security and strategy. So I think we're all tiptoeing around in Taiwan right now. He's tiptoe around and just probably play to the people around him to get a sense of where he is and try to manage that. But also does need to step up. They do need to figure out a way to pass this defense budget and demonstrate they're going to take care of their own defense. I think that's probably a consensus in the administration of importance. Personal interest is probably different than the others. I mean, it's pretty clear. Brent was stating. I'm not sure, maybe you had a personal interest before. We got missionary there. Or...
I was 4 years ago.
4 years ago.
Yeah, Taiwan. I get less of the time with Taiwan.
Yeah. A lot of folks who started as missionaries. I didn't start as a missionary. I was an Asian missionary. To me, I landed there. I worked with Ted Kennedy early on, the days when it was a human rights issue, not a security issue. And then I met the Don Y back in mid to late 80s. And when I wanted to go overseas, studied Soviet Union, decided Asia. It was doing Soviet stuff. I'll do China. And the place to do China was Taiwan. So I went to Taiwan 88, 89. I really connected with the place. So I've continued to be interested in Taiwan, follow its trajectory. And now I'm married to a woman from Taiwan, so I'm now a son-in-law of Taiwan. Officially.
Unfortunately, we are over time, but thank you all so much. Oh, I'm sorry, Brent, did you want to add something?
Or Adrian.
Adrian? Okay, last word, Adrian, please.
So I'll be very quick.
Yeah.
In terms of talking about hard power, I mean, I do think that as someone that researches soft power, it's, you know, harder to see some of those effects. They seem like they're very slow. It builds up very incrementally. But at the same time, I think we shouldn't underestimate how so many people that go to Taiwan end up falling in love with Taiwan. Many of our interns that work with us, they become interested in Taiwan because they studied in Taiwan, and now they want to help Taiwan. So I think that these relations are still very important and still continue on throughout different administrations, and there are things that people will keep with them throughout their lives. So I think that is still very important. And I think that also maybe answers some of your questions about why people become interested in Taiwan. Although for myself, I am Taiwanese American and my dad is Taiwanese, so that also contributes very much to my interest in Taiwan.
Again, thank you all so much for being here and engaging in our conversation. As I mentioned, we are, planning to release the full report in April, so stay tuned about that. And thanks again, and take care. Okay.
Good.